Thank you so much, Professor Jodi Detjen, for joining us as we celebrate Women's History Month. And you are a female leader on campus that we admire. So we're excited that we have a chance to chat with you. I will allow Adeleke lead with the intros, and then I will introduce myself and we'll get started with our questions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adeleke Yowa. I'm a Master's of Interior Design candidate here at Suffolk. I'm also a grad fellow here at the Career Center. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's me again, Adesua Igbenereka. I serve as Director for Career Equity and Access, and I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest today. I use she, her pronouns, and you're welcome to call me Adi. So, Jodi, we'll get started with you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Jodi Detjen. I am a professor here at Suffolk University, the Sawyer Business School. I also run the MBA program, and I'm also Associate Dean for Innovative Education and Programs. So I have lots of titles. I have lots of things that I do.
Right. So we'll get started with our first question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? I know you just introduced yourself, but give us a little bit about your background.
So it's interesting because I actually am partly what I do is I research women's career choices and why they make them. And so I think my career exemplifies what we see in our research, which is a huge zigzag. When I graduated undergrad, I was in technology. I was a computer programmer. And just so that everybody knows, historically speaking, when I was a programmer, I won't tell you exactly when, but I'll just say like early 90s, late 80s, women were 40% of the programmers, and women were actually the first programmers. So I say that because I want to make sure that everybody realizes historically, women actually were a significant part of the programming community. As I was a programmer, I realized what I really loved to do was to talk business as well as to talk tech. So I moved into more of a leadership role where I could speak both languages. And then I've pretty much stayed in that role for all my career. And in fact, I still do consulting in that space. And then I also became a professor along the way as I got some expertise in really leadership and organizational development and how change happens. It's one of my areas of focus.
Yeah, so what importance do you place on the Women's History Month? Like, as we celebrate, what's importance like?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the importance that I really place on Women's History Month is how much history has been lost, how much of women's stories have been lost over the centuries. And so I think when you think about, for example, I think it's Mendelssohn was this incredible pianist and this composer, and yet his sister was also incredible. And she did beautiful music, and yet nobody hears about it. And so there's all these different podcasts that you can listen to, like the Lost Women of Science, or all these stories of women's contributions that have never really been told. So from my perspective, Women's History Month should actually be 12 months. We should be talking about women's role in the society forever. It's just what bothers me is that women, of course, have always had a voice and been part of this. It's just the story's never been told. And it's time that we start telling these stories, because the idea of the lone man who goes out and creates something is actually, a misnomer. Even Einstein, for example, it was collaborative. Much of his thinking was collaborative, and he would write letters back and forth and back and forth. So the ideas don't just come to somebody fully baked. They have conversations with people, and women were often those people that they were having conversations with.
Totally, absolutely. As a female leader on campus who we admire, I just mentioned that you have multiple roles, but can you describe for us what it means to be the Associate Dean of Innovative Education and Programs? What does that mean?
Yeah, so what it means is that I stick my nose into all sorts of stuff where I think we can make some change. So I'll give you an example. Right now I'm working with Dave Mary, who's head of the Career Center, and I'm working with Associate Dean in CAS and another Associate Dean here at SBS. And the four of us are really trying to figure out, how do we measure competencies, students' competencies, in a really rigorous, effective way, so that we can actually show students what they've learned, and we can show employers what our students are capable of. And we can show professors the capability of the students and where they're at in their learning process. And we can show students how all these different pieces, these competencies work together to give them their program outcome. So this is a huge project. At first, when I first started this project, I thought this is not going to be that bad. It's going to be, let's be a couple months. And now I'm realizing this is a multi-year effort because we're shifting the way we think about and measure competencies. And what I love too is that part of my role is I get to work with people across the university. And so partnering with Dave, Mary is such a gift because we're looking at it from all these different perspectives. So that's just one project that I work on. Another big project is I really work with immersive learning. So this idea is, as we think about what business education looks like moving forward, everybody knows that AI is coming. But what we can't do is, you can't automate away learning. So how do you create learning environments so that students can actually practice and try out new concepts in a very hands-on way? And so we have this immersive learning where we bring client challenges into the classroom. And so students work with client challenges as an integral part of their coursework. And so my role is really how to spread this across SBS, how to give professors the tools to do this effectively, how to help students articulate what it is that they're learning, how to help think about how courses may change or differ. So as you can see in those two examples, basically, my role is what needs to change and how do we change it?
Great job.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight into what you do as the Dean of Innovative Education and Programming. So my next question will be, how has gender identity affected your career in positive or negative ways?
So it's really interesting. I never really thought about, I thought about being a girl when I was a girl, and I thought about that and what that meant, but I've always been extraordinarily interested in women's rights from birth. And I've always wanted to push the envelope as much as possible. But in terms of career choice, I didn't really know. I was always really good at math. So whenever I hear these stereotypes that girls aren't good at math, I don't understand, because my math classrooms were filled with girls. So I never really understood that. To me, that's just a stereotype, because I know a lot of women that are great in math. So I just moved along that pathway, and I never thought about, what it meant to be a woman or in that context. I will say that when I went to college, I started in engineering, and my classes were 90% male. I will say that I was kind of like, this doesn't seem fun. So I left. But I don't necessarily think I left just because it was all men, although that was definitely a factor. But also there was a new program that was opening up around blending business and technology, and that looked really interesting to me. So I moved towards that. In terms of my first 10 years of my first decade of my career, I felt like I had so much incredible support. Probably because I was I was an early professional in an era where women were being more recognized. People were more conscious that they wanted women to be in leadership positions. And so all my organizations were really open and supportive in moving me into leadership roles. So what's interesting to me is my curiosity is less to do with myself. Although I will say this, I think having children threw me for a huge loop, because I really didn't understand how much the world, at least the United States, puts so much enormous pressure on women as parents. And that was a very difficult time for me. It probably literally took me about 5 years to crawl myself out of that difficult time and figure out who I wanted to be, because the rules, and this is what we wrote about in my first book, the rules of what it means to be a woman, especially a mother, are quite strict. And I bristled at that. So that was very difficult for me. And in fact, that's where a lot of my research is focused, on that whole area.
Really interesting. So you are at a place where female leadership is a burden here. Does that make a difference in how you experience the workplace when you have female leadership?
It's interesting. I thought about this a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know why I was thinking about it. I don't know. It's really hard to tease it out. I don't know what would be different. I will say that, prior, let's just say 15 years ago, the university was very dominated by a very traditional leadership style that was very male dominant and traditional male characteristics. That was hard to be in that environment because there was not a lot of transparency. There was not a lot of openness. There was not a lot of clarity as to why one person versus another would get a particular role. And I didn't like that at all. It felt very much like, I know you tapped me on the back. And I don't know that that's a male leadership style, but it was dominated by men. I think it was more of a traditional bureaucratic type of leadership style. So I find that the current transparency of culture to me is just critical. So I don't know if it's because it's women or if it's because of the leadership style, but what I love is the transparency because I don't have any time to think about all this garbage. I just want to get done and get doing it. And I just love the fact that even if I barrel through and I step on some toes, nothing really happens. I mean, I'm not going to get in trouble, so to speak, because there's transparency around it. People know what it is that I'm doing. And I love that. What I also love, and again, I don't know that this is necessary because it's female leadership, but I love the idea of the empowered leadership model. This is, of course, what I've taught for decades. But it just, there's so much freedom to be able to explore and come up with ideas and then be able to persuade others to buy into those ideas. And that I think is absolutely essential to innovation, to just let people experiment and play with. So again, I think that's actually more just leadership style. And I've seen men with that leadership style as well. So I can't attribute it to having all women in leadership, but I do think that the culture is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Speaking about some of the books you wrote, and I did like a little digging, and I came across this book you wrote with Mitchell Waters and Kelly Watson, titled The Orange Line: A Woman's Guide to Integrating Career, Family, and Life. And you've been shedding a little light on this. But there was this very interesting phrase I came across, which is the feminine filter. Feminine filter, yeah. So I would like you to shed light on this and also on how women can act beyond this belief system, like you explained in the book. Yeah.
So in our research, we interviewed 118 college-educated women that were professional. We're actually replicating this research now. Again, we're updating it to see what's changed with the current generation. And so what we looked at was, the question we had was, why is it that women are not moving into senior leadership roles? What's going on here? And there's lots and lots of talk about the barriers. There's talk about opting out. There's all sorts of reasons, external reasons. But what we found in our research is that the feminine filter, it's what we call women have swallowed the identity of what it means to be an ideal woman. And an ideal woman, according to our research, is she does it all. She looks good. And she's very, very nice. And so these are the external rules of what it means to be a good woman. But what we found was that women were swallowing it and they were literally self-censoring. They were literally stopping themselves from making a career decision, for example, because of these rules. And they wouldn't, for example, speak up with a differing opinion because they wanted to be nice. It even comes down to, for example, money. There's a lot of push against women's use of money. A lot of women, we do a lot of work with women still in my organization, and there's this ick factor around money, and yet money, we need money. Money is a currency, and so there's all this work of how women have been inculcated and socialized to internalize these societal norms around what it means to be a woman. And so through that work, what we realize is there's a way out, and the way out is what we call reframe. And the first thing you have to do is you have to see the underlying assumption. So for example, money's ick. Well, what's the underlying assumption? That I'm not supposed to make money, that I'm supposed to be taken care of. Okay, does that assumption work for you? And for most women, of course, it does not work for them. And so then you do a reframe. And then the reframe is, actually, I need money to live my full life. And money is a signal of how much my impact is valued in the world. So money actually is quite important. And so we work with women, and this is a lot of the work that I've done as well over the years, is we work with women in organizations to really identify and break down these assumptions so that they can look at them with a different lens. And by looking at them with a different lens, they really wake up to how limited their thinking was based on these societal norms.
As a consultant, which you mentioned earlier, if we could do one thing as a society to move us towards gender diversity and parity in the workplace, what would that be?
Well, so it's interesting. Our second book, The Next Smart Step, was really took an organizational lens on how we could actually bring more parity into the workplace. And unfortunately, I don't think there is one thing, because this stuff is insidious and it's in a lot of different places. Now, according to McKinsey's research, they think it's like at that first supervisory step, which is where a lot of women drop off. So from their perspective, that's the one thing you could do, is you could ensure more women get to that first supervisory step. I think that that would help, of course, but I also think that we need to look at all the different steps in a woman's career and all the different decisions she makes for herself, for her family, as well as the career, as well as for the business. And we need to look at this from a holistic lens and then figure out how to make things easier. So to give you an example, for a lot of women, childcare is a big problem. And so one of the things that we looked at was the assumption that women are the ones responsible for childcare. Well, why did we make that assumption? My career, so the reframe is my career matters as much as my partners, as my spouses, my husband. And so therefore, if our careers are equally important, therefore childcare is our joint problem. And we have to look at it jointly. And we can look at childcare as an investment, and we can look at childcare as something that has to come off both our salaries, not just mine. And so childcare support is something that is still very much in our society looked at as a woman's responsibility. And so that, I think, would be a big lever. The other big lever is I really do believe that, and this is shifting, actually, starting to shift as we see more women into positions of power, as we start to reach 30%, even above in executive levels, we start to see the definition of leadership shifting. And so the definition of leadership is shifting to be much more collaborative, much more transparent. Some of the ideas that I talked about before, which were traditionally female. The other thing that I think would be really significant to change is this all-in mentality. So you don't see it as much in higher ed, even in the nonprofit world, but you do see it a lot in business, which is if you want to get to that upper echelon of business, you have to be all in. And this basically means you've got to give up your entire life for the business. And I think that assumption and that belief that the only people that are successful can have to do that is a misnomer. It's a missed opportunity, and it's really narrowing, especially with Gen Z coming along the line. They're like, no way. It's really narrowing the opportunity of who you're going to pick for talent. So I think, but I don't think people are ready to make that change yet. I think it's still not quite there yet.
Hopefully, slowly but surely, we'll keep moving the needle.
That's exactly it.
Can you tell us one highlight of your career that you deemed successful and how it shaped your career trajectory?
Yes. So when I was, first decade of my career, I lived in London for 5 years. And my previous boss, I moved there with my now husband and was working for a local UK firm. And then a previous boss of mine moved to London and rehired me. And through that job, I got this exposure to change management and really understanding the crossover between technology and how to use technology to make places more effective and efficient in their work. And it was some of the best work I've ever done. It opened me up to an entirely different career path. And it gave me so much energy. It also gave me a lot of mentors. So interestingly, one of my clients was my mentor. He was, probably about 15 years older than me, but he was one of the nicest people you've ever met. And he mentored me, and it was so incredibly useful. He taught me how to manage. He taught me how to respect people in a business way. It was just, there's so many lessons that I learned from him. So that entire experience was just really life-changing for me.
That's really amazing. As the executive director of the MBA program here at Suffolk University, what advice will you give your female students aiming for leadership roles like yours?
So I usually give 2 pieces of advice. The first is get out there and take the risks. Speak up. Go out in public, speak, go do a case competition, put yourself out there in a way that you might feel uncomfortable, but just do it. And then the second thing that I do is I say, most women are not ready to have children yet, but it's basically like marry well. So you should find a partner that is going to support your career ambition, because that is going to make or break your career more than almost any other decision that you make. And I can't tell you the number of women that we interviewed that said the same thing. It's like, if you marry well, or partner well, that's the person who's gonna support you, the ups and downs and all the other pieces, but they understand how important your career is. And so don't give up that. Don't give up your career for somebody else. It's not worth it.
So my last question to you is, if you were to give your younger self advice, what would it be?
This is funny. I would say get therapy younger. Meditate earlier. I think about all the things that I learned after, I was having some tough times in my life, but it happened way too late. I wish I had started all of it a decade earlier, because all the things that I learned to let go of the garbage that I had brought with me, if I had learned to let go of that earlier, I would have had a lot more freedom in my life. So that would be the advice. It's not career advice, it's personal advice.
Sometimes it's the personal things that help you excel or bring one down. And so sometimes getting your personal health and well-being in order helps you thrive. So
yes.
really, really appreciate that. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Jodi. This
Oh,
has
you're
been
so welcome.
so much fun.
It was really fun, Adi. Thank you so much. Have a great day.